Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Spring 2021 Climate and Water Update webinar. For those joining us for the first time, welcome. And for anyone who has joined us for our webinars before, welcome back. Before we begin proceedings, I'd like to acknowledge and pay respects to the Kulin Nations, who are the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet. I would also like to acknowledge and pay respects to the traditional custodians of the lands that we are gathered on in all states and territories, and pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. We acknowledge and respect their continuing culture and the contribution they make to Australia. Today we'll be giving you an in-depth analysis of recent conditions and as well as temperature and rainfall outlooks for spring to help make the important decisions for the months ahead. My name is Jordan. I'll be your moderator today. I'm joined by Claire, who will be producing today's webinar. Together we will help make the webinar as interactive as possible. But before we start, may I ask for your attention as we cover off some housekeeping items. With the current situation as it is in Australia, this webinar will be conducted from our respective homes and office spaces across the country. Please bear this in mind as we may encounter some technical issues during the broadcast. Our broadcast today will run for 60 minutes with plenty of time allocated for questions. This webinar is also being recorded and the video will be shared with you via email. For first-time webinar attendees, please see some helpful tips on your screen. Most importantly, please note the chat box, where you can send through any questions or feedback for the presenters. Please use this and not the Q&A box to send your questions to us during the session, and we'll answer as many as possible during the allocated breaks. Now, it's the speech bubble button on the right side of your screen, bottom right-hand corner. The icon will turn blue once it's on. If you want to test out the chat box now, feel free to tell us your name and where you're dialing in from. Thank you to everyone who has sent us questions during the registration process. We've used them to help shape the content you'll see today, and we'll get through as many as we can. Finally, I'm delighted to introduce you to our presenters from the Bureau. We have Senior Climatologist Catherine Ganter and Dr. Lynette Bedio. Welcome, team. Now, Dr. Lynette Bedio leads the long-range forecast team who are responsible for the preparation and analysis of Australia's instrumental climate record and issuing climate outlooks of climate conditions for the coming seasons. Catherine Ganter's focus is reporting on and communicating the current state of the main climate drivers for Australia, as well as the monthly and seasonal rainfall and temperature outlooks. So we have the best possible people for today's webinar. We have a packed hour for you today, including the Winter 2021 wrap-up, a spring outlook, what's driving the outlook, and a severe weather update. But let's not keep you waiting any longer and get straight to Catherine. She'll start us off with a look back at what happened over winter. Don't forget you can get your questions answered today, so send them in as soon as possible or as soon as you think of them. All yours, Catherine.
Thanks, Jordan. Just checking you can hear me.
We can hear you loud and clear.
Brilliant. Okay, let's start by taking a look at recent conditions. So first up, we've got Australian winter rainfall in the middle here, the big map. Blues show rainfall in the top 30% and reds show the bottom 30%. And this winter was the wettest winter since 2016. 2016 is in the corner there. But when you look at 2021 amongst all the winters since 1900, it's actually pretty close to average, ranking 55 out of 122 winters. So there's a lot of white on this map this month, so an average winter. There were no individual states in the top or bottom 20 either. Now, you may have heard we have a negative Indian Ocean dipole, or IOD, at the moment, and this is a wetter climate driver. Now, 2016, and part of the reason we have that there was the last time we had it, but it was a strong event in 2016, while this year seems to have been a weaker event. We'll have a bit of a look at the IOD later on and what's to come for it. So if we take a look month by month, the individual months were also relatively close to average. June and July were slightly wetter on the whole, and August slightly drier. I also wanted to mention Southwest WA specifically here. Climatologically, its wettest 3 months of the year are May to July, and Southwest WA had its wettest May to July this century, and also its 10th wettest July on record. So you can see in that corner there in July in the middle map. It was actually the wettest July there since 1996 and the wettest month full stop for Southwest WA since July 1996 too. So it has, if it felt wet for those in the southwest, it's been some time. Let's look at winter maximum temperatures now. The yellowy oranges show the top 30% and the blues in the show temperatures in the bottom 30%. And nationally, it was the 7th warmest winter since records began in 1910, with much of that a result of the warmer than usual conditions up north. You can see some in that deep orange colour, which is highest on record. So state-wise, Queensland was 4th warmest on record for winter days, with the Northern Territory 5th. And for other states in the top 10, Tasmania and South Australia also came in the top 10, both of them ranking 9th. And if some of you have felt like the year as a whole hasn't felt quite as warm as recent years, year-to-date maximum temperatures for Australia are actually the lowest since 2012, but it's actually still in the top 20. So, yeah, so if it hasn't felt quite as warm, that's why. In terms of winter minimum temperatures, they were also above average pretty broadly across the country, with the season ranking 9th highest for Australian winters. For the states, Tasmania came in at 3rd highest, Victoria equal 4th, and Queensland 6th. But let's have a look at the winter unusual warmth, and that was, let's focus on the winter days here. So these are the individual winter months for maximum temperatures, and I'll just draw you to the one in the middle there firstly, that's July. And Northern Australia was highest on record for many areas, so that dark orange, with that July the 5th warmest in 112 years. The last week of the month saw heat build across much of central and northern Australia, and this was due to a lack of southeasterly trade winds, which usually cool northwestern parts of the country at this time of the year. And for those that don't know, northwestern Australia is typically the warmest part of the country at this time of year. And many stations across northern Australia set records for their warmest July temperature on the 30th and 31st. And in terms of individual sites, we actually saw the 2nd highest July temperature measured in Australia during this month, 38.1. And this was actually done on 3 separate occasions during this month. August followed up with more warmth. A warm spell at the end of the month saw daily records broken across the northern parts of the Northern Territory, and Darwin saw 3 days in a row above 35. I can't comprehend 35 at this time of the year. I'm in Melbourne. And that happened for the first time in August. We also saw consistent warmth in other areas. Sydney, for example, set an August record with 15 consecutive days of at least 20 degrees. So, yeah, it's more about the persistent warmth for Sydney. So, if we have a look at soil moisture, here we're looking at the soil moisture for the top metre of the soil profile. Blues are above average and reds are below average. And August saw soil moisture average to above average in many of our key agricultural areas. We spoke a little about the southwest WA rainfall, and you can look in that area and see the soil moisture there is in the top 10% for quite a broad area there. So that's that deepest colour there. And this has meant that stream flow this has meant that stream flow has seen steady recovery from our dry years. At the bottom here, I'm showing a time series by month of the proportion of streamflow sites that have had either low, near median or high stream flows. Those sites are just there on the map in the top right corner there. So the Julys are highlighted in yellow for reference, and we can see the latest one there, July 2021, has the lowest proportion of low flows in at least 10 years. So the winter rainfall and the rainfall more generally this year has certainly helped improve the stream flow situation. And with the recovering stream flows, let's also look at storages. If we start with the key Murray-Darling Basin region, the northern part up there at the top has hit 80% full. That's as of 29th of August, compared to 25% at this time last year. Now, you might remember the concern of how low those levels are. So it's a bit of a positive story there this year. And in the southern part of the basin, storages are at 82.7% full, up from 62% last year. Okay, and if we look at other areas in the northwest there, storages are more than double what they were this time last year, 70.4% this year compared to 33.6% the year prior. And in and in Tasmania, storages are relatively similar, with current levels at 60%, slightly higher compared to last year. So finishing on a relatively positive note, I'll pass back to Jordan.
Thanks very much. I hope that gives you that gives you a lot of interesting information about what's happened in the past few months. Before we peer into the crystal ball and tell you what's happening in the next few months, we've got time to take your questions. Remember, hit the speech bubble button on the right of your taskbar and start sending them in. We have the full team on deck to answer your questions. So we're going to jump straight into it and introduce Lynette into the fold. She hasn't spoken yet, but I think she's the perfect person to answer this question. How does this negative IOD event compare to the last IOD event, Lynette?
Yeah, well, that's a really interesting question. So, like Catherine showed in her map, that last negative IOD event was a really strong event, one of the strongest negative IOD events we've seen, and it had those really strong impacts on Australian rainfall as well. So I think Catherine might have mentioned we had the wettest May to October period on record in 2016. So really strong negative IOD event with those really strong impacts over Australia. This time around, it's a lot weaker. It's really borderline. It is forecast to continue, but we are seeing weaker impacts on Australian rainfall. Though that above average rain and even average rain is really really helpful after some of those dry conditions we've had in recent years.
Okay. Gabrielle has asked, why was winter unusually warm?
I can answer some of that. So, with those July temperatures, what we were seeing was, at this time of the year, usually what you get is southeasterly winds going across much of the continent, and that helps cool down that warm northwest Australia. And we saw these winds weaken off quite significantly, and that allowed the northern parts of the country to heat up. So that was one factor, at least in July. I haven't actually had a look at what was going on in August, but we do also have our general long-term warming trend that will also have contributed to some degree.
Yeah, we do live in a big, diverse country, don't we? Because where I was, I found it was pretty cold. But that could also be my drafty house. Beth has asked, and I think interesting question, how is soil moisture measured? I think that's best for you, Lynette.
Well, what we have at the Bureau is a model that models soil moisture. So it takes in a lot of inputs from rainfall, from temperature, wind, solar. So and it does lots of calculations to actually model what that soil moisture is doing through different layers of the soil, and then that is then verified against an observational network, so we can get it as close to observations as possible. But having this, it allows us to go back in time, so we can see changes in soil moisture and the variation over time. But it is a modelled soil moisture that we have.
Okay. If you do want a really interesting deep dive, just Google soil moisture and how it's figured out. It's a really, really interesting deep dive I found.
Yeah.
Tim has asked. Oh,
Oh,
sorry, I cut
sorry.
you off.
I was just gonna say go to our website and you can see it all, but keep an eye on our website too, because there's going to be a new um, page coming up at the Bureau. So not only historical soil moisture and some of those historical values, but also seasonal outlooks of soil moisture and projections into the future. So a lot of exciting things happening in that space.
Yeah, really interesting. So keep an eye out for that. And sorry to cut you off there. Tim has asked, is an unusually warm winter in northwestern Australia a signal for a hot summer? Who wants to take that?
I suppose I'll start. Not necessarily. You can have that heat there, and it can build up. But we've got other factors at play as well, such as the negative IOD and the La Nina, which do tend to have some of those cooler conditions over Australia. But again, as Catherine said, with that warming trend, we do have those temperatures that we're getting now are on top of that trend. So we can still get heat waves.
Yeah. Okay. Nicole has asked, and I think inspired by your answer, Lynette, to the soil moisture question, are any measurements of the ocean or sea temperatures, are they modeled or are they performed on land? How do those come about?
I can start, and then maybe Catherine might want to jump in, because it's a big answer to a really good question. So our models, we actually, so our seasonal outlook models and like our weather forecast models as well, actually take on board, a lot of observations. So it takes into, sea surface temperature observations from buoys, from satellites. So there's a lot of information that's actually taking to rainfall observations, temperature observations. It takes all those into account, and then models it forward in time using really incredibly complex basic physics of the atmosphere and ocean and land, and that's how we get those forecasts that we do see. Those weather forecasts. So, Catherine, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I was just thinking at the beneath the surface, they do also have profilers that go down and look at the water temperature beneath the surface. But as you might imagine, it's very hard to get an accurate level with a few profile observations. So what they do is they model the subsurface based on what we know about ocean processes. So our subsurface observations are a blend, so it's a mix of both the observations and what we know about ocean processes.
Well, we did go off on a little bit of a tangent there. If you interested in finding out a little bit more about that, we did do a webinar in 2020, which was called Predicting Ocean Temperatures for Reefs, which deep dives into that as well. And that's available through our website, bom.gov.au/webinars. We're going to move on now, but that is not the final Q&A session. We do have a big Q&A session coming up just after we talk about some more things that are happening in the months ahead. I know we get a ton of questions for this, so get them in as soon as you think of them so we can ask them to our experts here. You see that they can talk about almost anything to do with weather, so that chance is coming up, our final Q&A session in just a bit. Send them in through the speech bubble button that's at the bottom right hand side of your screen. Now, Lynette will give us the outlook for spring 2021.
Jordan. So just looking ahead, starting with September, and looking at, I'll start with rainfall on the right-hand side of the screen there. So it's a real negative IOD type pattern there. You can see coming down from the northwest of Australia down through the continent to the eastern parts. So large parts of Australia in spring, especially through that northwest to east, increased chances of above median rainfall. And looking at temperature, so minimum temperature, overnight temperatures, much of Australia, really strong chances of warmer nights for September, and except that corner of southwest WA where there's increased chances of cooler nights in the far corner. Looking ahead at maximum temperatures or daytime temperatures for September, we can see increased chances of above average daytime temperatures across northern parts of Australia and down through the west coast there and in that southeast corner. So, and then in South Australia and coastal parts of Queensland, no strong swings towards above or below median daytime temperatures or maximum temperatures. Next slide, please. So looking ahead at spring. So again, looking at rainfall, it's quite a stronger signal. So this also reflects that forecast negative IOD conditions, but also reflects those cooler conditions in the tropical Pacific. So not quite a La Nina, not quite up to those levels like we saw last year. Catherine will speak on that a bit more coming up, but cooler conditions which can promote, and with that negative IOD, can promote a wetter than average conditions across Australia in spring, or across eastern and southern parts of Australia in spring. So we're seeing that signal there in that spring outlook. And then, but looking at WA and western parts of Tasmania, no strong swings towards above or below average rainfall, below median rainfall, except those real coastal parts in WA and that southwestern tip there in Tasmania. And looking at daytime temperatures, so those daytime temperatures. So looking at northern parts of Australia, similar to what we saw in part for September. So northern parts of Australia, but that far southeast corner, so Tasmania and southern parts of Victoria, increased chances of above median daytime temperatures, increased chances of cooler than average or daytime temperatures across much of the inland parts of Australia. So South Australian there, New South Wales, away from the coast, and southern parts of Queensland and southern parts of WA, and no strong swings towards above or below median temperatures elsewhere. Looking at nighttime temperatures, looking in the middle there, it's a very red looking map, but that just means that there's increased chances of above median. So really a strong chance of above median minimum temperatures across much of the country there, excepting again that southern part of WA. So looking at where in the far southern parts, there's increased chances of below average, below median daytime temperatures. So I'll just say again for rainfall as well. So looking at rainfall, it looks very blue, but just taking this chance to remind you that that doesn't mean that there's going to be lots and lots of rainfall everywhere. It just really indicates that there's a strong chance of above median rainfall for the period. So where it's darker blue, it means that there's a stronger chance of above median rainfall. And Looking at those maps underneath, just have a look, and we'll go to the next slide soon, but we're just having a look at that. They look all, they look pretty green. So if we can go to the next slide, we'll zoom in on those maps because they're actually an important factor to take into consideration. So those maps give you the skill of the forecast. So how many times when we run this forecast over our what we call a hindcast period, or over a period of years, how many times did it get that forecast correct? So it gives you that percent consistent. So we can see that across pretty much all of the variables, rainfall, daytime and nighttime temperatures, it's really green across much of the continent. And we do see these this skill increase in spring, which kind of makes sense when you think about it with Australian, our climate strongly affected by things like the negative IOD, by things like ENSO with La Nina and El Nino. And that does impact in spring. So when those drivers are active, we see we can see a more skillful forecast. So, but something to keep in mind when you are using, or perhaps using some of this information in your thinking, how skillful, or what is the skill of the forecast for the period I'm looking at. Thanks. Next slide. I just thought I'd show this as well, because sometimes whilst above and below median is really good for giving you that that big picture of what's going on. We've got these influences acting, so it's likely to be above average, but you might need more information than that in something, to factor into some of your decisions or some of your thinking. And I just thought I'd show you some of the other products that we have on our website. So this one here is the chance of exceedance. So what rainfall, I like to think of it, what rainfall totals am I likely to see? So looking at spring, you can have a look at those two maps there, and you can see that for September to November, there's a 75% chance of exceeding those certain levels. So if we, I suppose, look at the yellow, we have a 75% chance of exceeding or being between that 25 to, or exceeding 25 millimetres over large parts of the country, excluding parts of Western WA there. And likewise for the 50% chance of exceeding, so not quite as sure, not quite as strong, but there's still a chance, chance of, so there's more of a chance of exceeding that. So that's a bit more uncertain. But I suppose I've looked at this for September to November, but just reminding that we also have periods of 1 month, and as we saw, but we also have weekly and fortnightly periods as well. So that might be something that you might, and you can, can zoom in on, what sort of rainfall totals you're likely to expect a little bit more. So looking at the next slide. And we can also see another way of looking at it is how much rain am I likely to get? So giving it a level, a total, say, 15 millimetres or 10 millimetres, and saying, well, what are my chances of exceeding 10 millimetres? So in this example here, I've shown what are my chances of getting at least 10 millimetres? And so for the 4th of September to the 17th of September, you can see that those chances are increased in southern parts of Australia, and those alpine areas, you have stronger chances of getting at least 10 millimetres in that upcoming fortnight. But that drops away as you go further inland and up to northern parts of Australia. And also just a reminder that you can click on any location and get some of that information tailored for your location. Next slide. Another product that we have, so that's just finishing up now, is the northern rainfall onset. So with the northern rainfall onset, it's not the wet season, but it's actually looking at when we start getting those that rainfall coming back to the tropical north, and what is the likely onset date of that, what we call well, it's a 50 millimetre or a useful rainfall level, and those levels that can trigger off physical processes such as starting pasture growth. So what is the likely onset date of that total rainfall after the 1st of September? And shown here, is it likely to be earlier or later than usual? And you can see that much of Northern Australia, except for those perhaps more northwest parts of WA, are likely to see an earlier onset date than usual. So looking at the next slide. And as Catherine showed earlier, with the observations, we've seen higher stream flows recently, which is good, again, coming out of that drought period, and good to see some of those higher storages. So what is that stream flow outlook for August to October? So taking into account some of that rainfall that we've had and also that forecast rainfall. So looking ahead, really the majority of locations have got high flows forecast for the August to October period. That'll be updated in the first half of this month for September to November. But looking at August to October, we can see those high flows are more likely for the majority of locations there. So especially across those eastern parts of Australia and in northern Tasmania and southwest WA there that have seen that above average rainfall. And with that sort of greyed out in parts of some northern parts of Australia there where it's seasonally dry. And next slide. So looking now at the seasonal bushfire outlook for spring, and just being clear here that this is not put out by the Bureau. The Bureau works with the Australian fire agencies, or AFAC, and fire agencies all around Australia have input into this outlook, and based on their long experience and what they're seeing on the ground. And the Bureau provides an outlook like what we've done today, talking about rainfall that we've seen and the rainfall and temperatures that are forecast. So that goes into this outlook. So what we see here, I suppose your eyes are, well, my eyes are drawn to the red here, and that so that's where we've seen increased, that has above normal fire potential, and that's where we've seen increased grass growth with those wetter conditions that we have seen. So with that increased grass growth, when that does dry out, there's an increased risk of grass fire. So, which can be very fast moving. So yeah, always keep an eye on warnings around that. But looking down the east coast there, you can actually see some blue parts, and that's where those more forested areas, those blue parts, where we saw fires in 2019 and to 2020, and has not recovered, or that fuel growth is slower growing, not as agile as that sort of more inland grassy type areas, and is slower to come back, and so there's lower chance of bushfires, below normal bushfire potential in those areas, and normal in other areas due to the fact that it has been wetter and with that wet outlook. But as we do go into summer, this is just for spring, and as we do go into the summer and get to the peak of the fire season in summer, sort of going into autumn in southern parts of Australia, just keeping an eye on that with that rainfall, that increased growth, as that potentially dries out. So keeping an eye in November for that summer outlook. And next slide, please. So one thing we think about is the significant weather that we're likely to have in spring. So this is just looking at spring. So with that increased soil moisture that we've seen, and with that increased, those increased stream flows and higher water storages and the forecast rainfall, there's increased risk of that widespread flooding. So again, something to keep an eye on. Similar likelihood compared to recent decades for severe storms. And as I've just discussed, the bushfire risk is similar in many places, but increased for parts of Queensland and New South Wales. The heat wave risk is similar. We have some of those cooler temperatures forecast and the negative IOD. But again, as we've discussed, we are, is on a warming trend, so you can still get those warmer temperatures. And as we go into summer, something to keep an eye on. Our tropical cyclone outlook will be released in October, so then that will give outlook for the tropical, the number of the chances of above average or below average number of tropical cyclones in the coming season. And with that rainfall that we have seen and the rainfall forecast, drought is less likely and dust is less likely. So I'll stop it there and hand over to Catherine.
Thanks, Lynn. So let's take a look at what's behind a lot of these outlooks. So firstly, I'll just start with with an info slide. As we've mentioned, we have a negative Indian Ocean dipole in place, or we say IOD. It's very hard to say Indian Ocean dipole lots. And the negative IOD encourages warmer waters to the north and northwest of Australia and cooler waters near the Horn of Africa. And what this does, it favours rainfall across our region, with winter-spring rainfall typically above average for parts of southern and eastern Australia. All events are slightly different, so the typical map you see there on the right is not something that you would expect every single time, but just as a general pattern to get an idea. Now, the one thing to note about the IOD is that it only affects us in the winter-spring months. As the monsoon trough migrates down to the southern hemisphere, it stops that dipole setup being able to continue, and then we see little influence from the IOD during the summer months. Okay, and in the bottom corner here we have the weekly IOD values. Unfortunately, I've just realised 2016 isn't on there, but for your reference, but they were much cooler than what we see, not much more negative than what we see in our current event. And our last few weeks, just to note, have seen slightly weaker negative IOD values, but the models are indicating that this is likely to be only temporary, with most models predicting the negative IOD event likely to persist for the spring months. So those spring months there are on the right-hand side, with the monthly average from each model shown in the bars there. And you can see most of those model averages remain in the blue region for the spring months. And I haven't shown December, but it is neutral. Okay, and if we take a look at the El Nino Southern Oscillation, so that's El Nino and La Nina, currently things are neutral, although we have seen the tropical Pacific Ocean cool over the past 2 months. Now, while most of the models we survey suggest that the cooling is likely to continue, they don't cool far enough that to reach the Nina levels for the most part. So they indicate that neutral ENSO conditions are likely to persist. Only 2 of our 7 models suggest that the waters will remain cool enough, will cool enough and for long enough to be considered a La Nina event. So 5 of our 7 models are looking at neutral conditions for the months ahead. But the thing to note is that as we approach the Niña levels, we can still see some influence. So this cooling of the tropical Pacific may still be contributing a little to the wetter spring outlooks that we've seen for Australia. And I'll pass back to Jordan now.
Great, thank you very much. I hope that gives everybody listening a lot of information on what will be happening this spring and what those causes of what the drivers behind those are doing as well. Now it's a great opportunity to get your answered question, your question answered by our panelists. All of them are back on deck, so please start sending them in now and we'll get to them as soon as we can. Now, I did have an interesting question that's come through. This one's from Adrian. He's asked, why are increased minimum temperatures likely right across Australia for spring, but a different pattern for maximum temperatures? I think that's a good one for you, Catherine.
Yeah, that is a really good question. So let me think how best to answer that. I guess maximum and minimum temperatures are influenced by different things. So during winter, maximum temperatures tend to be more influenced by rainfall. So that sort of cooler signal you see across much of the southern and eastern regions, that's partly due to the high likelihood of wetter conditions in those areas. But further north, you'll see both days and nights are likely to be warmer, and they're more influenced by sea surface temperatures. So the warmer sea surface temperatures across the north are likely playing a part in the days and nights across the north. And then for the south, why we have warmer nights, there's a few reasons why that might occur, but with increased cloud cover, during winter time, it actually acts a bit like a blanket. So the daytime warmth doesn't have as much opportunity to escape. So you get milder overnight temperatures, and this is the case for that sort of winter and springtime period. I don't know if you want to add anything more to that, Lynn?
Catherine, I think you've answered that really well.
Great. We're going to move on to a question from Nick. He's asked, how do you estimate the onset of the rainfall?
As in the north, I assume that's the northern
Yeah, I assume
rainfall
that as well.
onset.
Yes.
So what our climate model simulates the atmosphere, and so each model, our model simulates the atmosphere, and so there is rainfall totals that you can see in the model, but the best way to use them is we need to make sure that there's skill, and the timing of the first rains of the north are often tied in with a climate driver. For instance, there's a strong El Nino and La Nina signal for the northern rainfall onset, and even the Indian Ocean dipole can influence that northern rainfall onset. So what the model does is it looks at the first rains and whether those rains are likely to be earlier or later than usual. And courtesy of our climate drivers, there's skill in being able to indicate whether they're early or late.
Okay. We've got a question from Emma, and you did show a map a little bit before, and they'd like some clarity around the difference in the information provided between the BOM-FIRE forecast and the AFAC forecast, which was that map that you were showing before. Lynette, would you like to take care of that?
Yeah, so they're actually the one forecast. So it's actually an AFAC or AFAC forecast, AFAC forecast, and we show their forecast in our video. So it's not actually a bureau forecast, but our information does play a role in that forecast, where we provide and we have those meetings with them, and we talk to what conditions we've seen, what conditions are coming up, and they have their expert advice around what this means for the fire type situation, what it means for resources, and what it means for types of fire. So really driven by those fire agencies, and it's actually always really interesting to have a look at that. And if you go to the AFAC website and have a look at it, and it breaks it down by state as well, and each state gives a commentary. And so in the more southern states at the moment, for instance, it's not actually into the fire period. So, but talking about conditions for planned burning as well.
Okay.
And Lynn, I was just going to add, I don't know about you, but I tend to learn so much through that process.
Yeah, it's really it is really worth going to have a look for your area and have a look at the individual commentary for your area.
Okay. Satu has asked, and I hope I pronounced that correctly, do you have a definitive date for the release of the tropical cyclone outlook in October?
I think I have that at hand. It looks like it should be the 11th of October.
Okay, so there you go, Satu. Keep an eye out for it, 11th of October. Harry has asked, is there any correlation between inland soil moisture or rainfall and the severity or number of southeast Queensland storms? That's something for you, Catherine?
I don't know of any correlation. Lynn, I don't know if you know of any correlation either. I would imagine that if you're seeing any, what might be the case is that typically if you get increased soil moisture and rainfall in inland Australia, the same factors that are making things wet there is probably what's increasing the severity or number of southeast Queensland storms. That would be my guess, but Lynn, I don't know if you'd like to comment there.
No, so it's an interesting question. I do know that not for individual storms, but it's been shown, in the model that when we do take that soil moisture into account, it can improve the overall seasonal outlook. So yeah, certainly it's an interesting question, and I don't know of any correlation either, but it certainly those longer time scales, it can be an important factor.
Okay, well, we do actually have another person answering questions in the background through our chat. Another doctor, Dr. Andrew Watkinson, he says he doesn't know of a correlation either. So great question, Harry. Moving on to Joseph's question, what is the projection of timing of the northern monsoon this summer? Do we have any timing on that?
I am not aware of anything as yet for the monsoon. It's probably a bit on the early end at this point because the northern rains tend to occur quite early, so that's it's the very first rains, whereas the monsoon is more of that. It's the very distinct monsoon trough arriving.
Okay. I'm going to combine two questions now because we are getting a few questions about what's going to happen with La Nina or ENSO. Helena has asked, is ENSO neutral likely to persist in spring? And Sarah has asked, can we have an update on the 2021-2022 La Nina prediction? I know a lot of people are interested in this. We didn't really have a normal Australian summer last year because of La Nina. And they usually come in pairs. So I've been interested in whether it's going to happen again. Lynette, would you like to start off with that, or is that more for you, Catherine?
I'm easy either way. Lynn, would you like to?
I'll start, and then of course Catherine has just presented on the ENSO and situation, so she'll be able to continue. So conditions are looking more neutral at the moment, as Catherine showed. There's some models that are showing some weak indications of a La Nina event, but only they don't really persist that, and it's not the majority going into summer. So again, we put out a climate driver update every 2 weeks, so it's something we are monitoring closely because of the impacts that La Nina and El Nino can have on the Australian climate. So do keep a watch on that. But we haven't actually satisfied the criteria to go into a La Nina watch yet. But again, that is something we are monitoring closely. So I suppose why we're sort of wanting to know about La Nina, because it does sort of persist through summer, often into that autumn period, whereas the negative IOD, as Catherine said, once we get that monsoon down into the southern hemisphere, that tends to break down. Catherine,
Okay.
did you want to add to that?
No, I think you've summarised it well. Thanks, Lynn.
Excellent. Well, I just want to give everybody a reminder that we are about to stop taking questions. So if you have one, now is the time to get it in. We've got Andrew in the background. He's answering questions. We've also got the two hosts here that are happy to take your questions as well. So last chance, last call to send in your questions now. Gabrielle has asked, what are the forecasts for the Antarctic Oscillation? Lynette, what do you think?
I think Catherine was going to
Oh, I'm
volunteer for that
sorry.
one.
My mistake. Catherine, let us know about the Antarctic Oscillation.
Sure, I've been looking at this one this week, so that's why I'm up to date. So at the moment, it's actually on the positive end. So just to take it back a step, the Antarctic Oscillation is also known as the Southern Annular Mode. So that's our climate driver that affects our fronts and troughs that cross the country. And usually during winter, a positive phase tends to mean less rainfall for much of those western-facing parts of southwest and southeast Australia. And we've got a positive phase for the coming 2 to 3 weeks. But as we transition into spring, we start to see a bit of a wetter influence in New South Wales. So the tricky thing about SAM is that its influence changes with season. So these positive SAM conditions that are likely may be giving this dry influence for parts of the southwest. But as we head into spring, positive SAM conditions is more likely to bring wetter conditions to parts of New South Wales.
Okay. Bill has asked, what are any predictions for the spring or summer rain in Eastern Australia?
Lynn, do you want to?
Sorry, I just lost the sound there for a
Sure,
second.
I'll
Can you
repeat
please
it.
repeat that?
Bill has asked, what are the predictions for spring, summer rain in Eastern Australia?
So looking at spring, so there's those strong indications of above average rainfall over Eastern Australia, and we do have a outlook. We don't just show the coming 3 months. We also show the 3 months following that. So we show not following that, but overlap with that. So we show October to December as well. So looking ahead for that October to December period really looks similar to what we saw for spring, and not quite as strong a signal, but and over Eastern Australia, but still increased chances of above average rainfall over parts of Eastern Australia. And yeah, do keep an eye out on that. So so next week we'll be putting out the first forecast for October to December, and I think this is correct. Next week we'll be putting out October to December and November, December, January. So keep an eye on that.
Okay,
And
I'm going to squeeze.
just to
sorry.
confirm, that is correct. November to January will be out next week.
Okay, excellent. I'm going to squeeze this one last question in, so we need a quick answer, but this one's come from Leo. He's asked, has the reduction of air travel impacted the Bureau's ability to forecast climate?
Go, Catherine.
I was going to say, I know that this has been looked at, but I haven't looked at what the results were. I don't know if you've seen anything on that, Lynn.
Yeah, no, it is a really interesting question because a lot of the observations, well, some of the observations do come from those flights, especially, yeah. So, but yeah, so I think I might be misremembering here, but I think it's and maybe less of an impact in the southern hemisphere simply because we didn't have as many flights as what they
Okay.
did in the northern hemisphere, so they were perhaps a bit more dependent on that. But yeah, really good question, and it's I think one that I'd have to go away and
Well,
have a
we
look
actually
at some of the work out.
Andrew has just jumped in and said, yes, you are correct, Lynn. But also, we have replaced the air travel with balloon flights and satellite observations. So they've made a way around it, just like everyone's stuck at home at the moment or doing work from home. We've come to a solution around a problem. So there was a lot of information to take in there, but if you missed the start, Lynette, would you like to summarize what we spoke about today, and more importantly, where people can find more information?
Yes, thanks, John. So, just in summary, those main messages. So, really around that negative Indian Ocean dipole, it's quite weak, but it is likely to persist through the spring. And the tropical Pacific Ocean is forecast to cool, but not many models going for that La Nina levels or going for it long enough to be considered a La Nina event. But as I like to say, we're on the right side of the dial. We're on that cooler side rather than the warmer side. So we are where we want to be. But and just a reminder that we've talked about climate change in terms of heat. We didn't sort of talk about and in terms of rainfall as much with that decline that we've seen from April to October across southern rainfall. But climate change, those long-term trends are acting in the background there, and so some of this variability is happening on top of those long-term trends. So just in summary for spring, so spring rainfall is likely to be above median for the eastern 2/3 of Australia and parts of WA, but below median for parts of Western Australia there. So spring days likely to be warmer for the northern tropics and the far southeast, cooler daytime temperatures likely for much of southern and eastern Australia. So spring nights are likely to be warmer than median for most of Australia, but cooler for southern WA.
Okay.
So thanks, Jordan.
Yeah, thank you, Lynette. If you'd like to get more information on your favorite platform, why not connect with us uh, on social media, our blog, or our excellent Bomb Weather app. And you can subscribe to receive updates direct to your inbox from everything the team have talked about today, or information on upcoming webinars. I might get you to go one screen back. These are some really great links for more information. Don't worry if you can't take them down right now. We will be sending the presentation materials out in an email pretty soon, and you'll be able to access the links through there. Well, that brings us to the end of today's webinar. For any questions we didn't get to, please email weatherquestions@bom.gov.au. A big thank you to Catherine and Lynette for your time in developing the content and sharing your knowledge with us, and for Andrew in the background answering questions. And to you, thanks for tuning in today. We hope you enjoyed the session, and we do hope you'll join us again next time. If you'd like to continue the conversation, please use the hashtag #BombWebinars in your LinkedIn posts. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the session has been recorded, and we will have that video ready for your on-demand viewing pleasure in the next couple of days, so watch this space. Finally, but most importantly, we want your feedback. It's our aim to bring you the highest possible quality webinars, but we can't do that unless you share your experience with us. So once this webinar closes, a short survey will pop up on your screen, and we'd be very grateful if you could complete that anonymously for us. Once again, thank you for your time. We look forward to seeing you again soon. Goodbye.